What if the first man who ever escaped death wasn't a king, wasn't a warrior, wasn't even a miracle worker? What if he was just a quiet man who walked, not ran, not fought, not conquered? He walked, and one day he didn't come back. No grave, no funeral, no body, just silence. Imagine living in a world drowning in corruption, violence everywhere, pride everywhere, people laughing at God, mocking faith, living like nothing matters. And in the middle of that chaos, there was one man who made a decision so radical, so dangerous, so different. He chose friendship with God over survival in society. His name was Enoch, and what happened to him has terrified skeptics, inspired believers, and confused historians for thousands of years. Because this was not a myth, this was not poetry, this was recorded history, and it begins in a broken family. After Abel was murdered, humanity stood at a spiritual crossroads. One line chose ambition, one line chose revenge, one line built cities without God, but another line chose remembrance. From Adam came Seth, from Seth came Enoch, from Enoch came a chain of men who refused to let the knowledge of God disappear. They were not perfect, but they remembered. And sometimes remembering is more powerful than rebelling. Generations passed, centuries passed. These men lived for hundreds of years. Imagine sitting at a fire, listening to your great-great-great-grandfather tell you stories about the Garden of Eden from someone who actually met Adam. History was not books back then. History was breathing. And into this living memory, Enoch was born. But he was not born special. He was not glowing with light. He was not performing miracles as a child. He was ordinary. And that's what makes this story dangerous. Because if he was ordinary, then what happened to him is possible for anyone. The world he grew up in was changing. Technology advanced, music flourished, metal tools were created, cities expanded, civilization was rising, morality was falling. People were becoming intelligent but empty, advanced but restless, rich but hollow. Does that sound familiar? Enoch watched both sides. He saw men building greatness without God. He saw others clinging to faith quietly, and something inside him began to ache. Not for power, not for wealth, for presence. There was a hunger in him, not for success, for closeness. And this is where most people lose retention in videos, because they rush the transformation. But Enoch's change did not happen in one dramatic lightning moment. It happened in silence. He started waking up earlier. He started sitting alone more. He started thinking deeper. He started asking dangerous questions. What if knowing about God is not the same as knowing Him? That question changed everything. Years passed. Then, at age 65, something shifted. He became a father. His son's name was Methuselah. And this name was not random. It meant, when he dies, it shall come. That's not a normal baby name. That's a warning. God revealed something to Enoch. Judgment was coming. Not tomorrow, not next year, but it was coming. And instead of running from that revelation, Enoch leaned in. From that point forward, the text says something that should shake you. Enoch walked with God. Not believed in, not worshipped occasionally, walked daily, consistently, intentionally, for 300 years. Let that sink in. 3 centuries of consistency. No viral moment, no spotlight, no applause, just steady intimacy. And here's the part most people miss. Walking means alignment. If 2 people walk together, they must agree on direction. Enoch adjusted his pace, adjusted his desires, adjusted his priorities until his life matched God's rhythm. That is rare, and heaven noticed. Meanwhile, the world mocked him. Imagine preaching that judgment is coming for centuries and nothing happens. People laughed. People questioned. People said, if God is real, where is he? But the delay was mercy. Every year his son lived was another year of grace for humanity. God was not slow, he was patient. And Enoch understood something most people don't. Delay does not mean denial. Time passed. Enoch aged physically, but spiritually he was becoming lighter. The boundary between heaven and earth grew thinner until one day he went for a walk. Like always, nothing dramatic, no trumpet, no announcement. And then he did not return. Genesis records it in the most mysterious way. He was not, for God took him. That's it. 2 words changed history. He was not. Imagine the confusion. Family searching, neighbors whispering, skeptics scrambling for explanations. But there was no body, no evidence, just absence. God broke the rule of death for one man. Why? Hebrews tells us, because he pleased God. Not because he was famous, not because he built something, because he pleased him. Do you understand how powerful that is? A human being brought pleasure to the heart of God, and the reward was intimacy without interruption. This was the first glimpse that death is not ultimate, that relationship outlasts mortality, that heaven is not myth. And thousands of years later, his story still disturbs comfortable hearts, because it forces a question. If Enoch could walk with God in a corrupt generation, what is stopping us? Not technology, not culture, not politics. The only barrier is distraction. Enoch chose depth over noise, presence over popularity, consistency over hype, and heaven responded. This is not just ancient history. This is a mirror. The world today looks shockingly similar to his time. Advanced, proud, violent, self-focused. And still, the invitation remains. Walk. Not perform, not impress. Walk. Because one day, the greatest miracle will not be wealth or influence or survival. It will be hearing these words, "Well done." And maybe, just maybe, the story of the first man who escaped death was not written to impress us, but to warn us, to prepare us, and to invite us. The question is not whether God still walks. The question is, will you?
What if Enoch didn't just walk with God? What if he saw something that no one else around him could see? Not just spiritually, prophetically. Because here's something most people never slowed down to notice. The Bible doesn't only say Enoch walked with God. It says he prophesied. In fact, thousands of years later, the book of Jude records his words. Not rumors, not legends, words. Enoch looked at a world drowning in corruption and said something terrifyingly bold. The Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to execute judgment. Think about that. This is before the flood, before Moses, before Israel, before kings, before prophets, before written scripture. And yet, this man is talking about a coming divine intervention. How did he know? Where did that clarity come from? Because walking with God changes what you see. Most people see chaos and panic. Enoch saw a pattern. Most people saw power growing. He saw accountability coming. There's a difference between predicting trends and discerning destiny. And Enoch was not predicting culture. He was sensing heaven. But here's the deeper layer most people ignore. His son's name was Methuselah. When he dies, it shall come. And when you trace the timeline, something astonishing appears. The year Methuselah died, the flood began. That means for nearly 1,000 years, God allowed humanity to continue. Why? Because judgment was delayed by mercy. Every year Methuselah breathed was another year humanity had to turn back. That is not rage. That is patience. We often imagine divine justice as immediate, but the prophetic dimension of Enoch reveals something else. God warns before he acts. He reveals before he responds. He gives space before consequence. And Enoch carried that warning inside him for centuries. Imagine living with that knowledge, watching generations be born, watching cities expand, watching violence increase, and knowing time is ticking. But here is what makes this even more intense. Enoch's prophecy wasn't only about the flood. Jude's wording points beyond that moment. It speaks of a future arrival, a final reckoning, a moment when hidden things are exposed, which means Enoch's vision stretched further than his own era. He glimpsed something beyond his lifetime. And this is where it becomes personal, because prophecy is not about predicting dates. It's about revealing direction. Enoch wasn't obsessed with timelines. He was aligned with purpose. There's a reason a story is so short in Genesis. Sometimes the loudest lives leave the smallest paragraphs, because impact is not measured in word count. It's measured in alignment. Now think about the world around Enoch. Genesis says people's thoughts were continually inclined toward evil. Continually, not occasionally. That word alone should disturb us. When darkness becomes normal, light becomes offensive. And Enoch's life was offensive, not because he attacked people, but because he refused to mirror them. His consistency exposed inconsistency. His peace exposed chaos. His quiet walk exposed loud rebellion. And that is prophetic living. You don't need a microphone to be prophetic. You need alignment. The deeper prophetic layer is this. Enoch's life was a preview. Before the flood came judgment. Before judgment came a warning. Before warning came relationship. And before destruction, one man was removed, taken, preserved. Why? Some scholars believe his removal was symbolic, a sign that God can preserve those aligned with him, not through escape from difficulty, but through intimacy beyond it. Whether you interpret that spiritually or historically, the pattern remains. Walk first, witness second, warning third, outcome last. But here's the emotional core of it all. Enoch did not preach with fear. He walked with faith. And faith is not loud. It's steady. He did not spend centuries screaming about destruction. He spent centuries cultivating closeness. Because prophecy without relationship becomes paranoia. But prophecy with intimacy becomes clarity. Now pause and think. Why would God reveal coming events to a man? Because he was listening. Most people pray. Few people listen. Enoch listened. And listening changes everything. When you walk daily with someone, you begin to feel their heart. You sense what moves them. You understand what grieves them. Enoch felt the grief of heaven over corruption. And instead of becoming cynical, he became closer. That's rare. Today, when we see moral decline, conflict, division, we either panic or we numb ourselves. Enoch didn't either. He deepened his walk, and that is a prophetic invitation hidden in his life. It's not about decoding headlines. It's about cultivating depth, because when you walk closely with God, you don't fear the future. You trust the author. And here's something that should shake comfortable hearts. Enoch's prophecy about divine coming judgment echoes later through history, through prophets, through apostles, through teachers, a reminder that accountability is real. But mercy is longer. Delay is not weakness. Silence is not absence. Patience is not indifference. Every extra year in Methuselah's life was a testimony. There is still time, and that may be the deepest prophetic truth of all. There is still time. Time to walk. Time to align. Time to choose depth over distraction. Enoch's generation ignored the warning, but Noah listened, and the flood became not just destruction, but separation. Separation between those who ignored and those who aligned. The prophetic dimension of Enoch is not meant to create fear. It's meant to awaken urgency without panic. Because here's the reality. Every generation believes it is advanced. Every generation believes it is secure. Every generation believes consequences are far away. And every generation is given space. Space is grace. But grace is not forever. And Enoch understood that tension. Mercy and justice. Patience and accountability. Closeness and consequence. He carried that tension without losing peace. That is maturity. And maybe that is why heaven trusted him with vision. Not because he wanted secrets, but because he wanted God. If you chase signs, you miss substance. If you chase dates, you miss depth. Enoch chased presence, and presence revealed perspective. So here's the question that lingers after his story. If you knew time was limited, would you live differently? If you knew accountability was certain, would you walk closer? Enoch did not wait for flood to change his life. He changed before the storm. And that may be the most prophetic act of all, because true prophecy is not about forecasting disaster. It's about preparing hearts. And long before rain ever touched the earth, Enoch's life was already aligned with eternity. He saw beyond his generation, beyond the flood, beyond his own lifetime. And then one day, he stepped from prophecy into presence. No grave, no decay, just transition. From walking with God on earth to walking with him beyond it. And maybe the deepest prophetic question is not when judgment comes, but whether we are walking now. Because the future does not belong to the loudest. It belongs to the aligned. And Enoch's quiet, steady, relentless walk still whispers across centuries. There's still time. What if the flood wasn't just about water? What if it was about a heart that had finally reached its limit? We often picture the story of Noah as a children's tale. Animals, Arkansas rain. But the truth is far heavier. Because before the rain ever fell, something inside heaven broke. Genesis says something chilling. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great, and every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Only, continually. Those are not casual words. That's total corrosion. This wasn't one bad generation. It was a culture that normalized darkness. Violence wasn't shocking anymore. Corruption wasn't hidden anymore. Pride wasn't embarrassing anymore. It was celebrated. Sound familiar? The text even says something deeply emotional. It grieved him to his heart. Not anger first. Grief. That word changes everything. Judgment wasn't triggered by irritation. It was triggered by heartbreak. Imagine creating something beautiful, watching it flourish, then watching it slowly destroy itself. That was the emotional climate of that era. Humanity had advanced technologically. Music, metal, cities. Innovation was thriving, but morality was collapsing. Intelligence without restraint. Power without accountability. Freedom without responsibility. That's not progress. That's imbalance. And imbalance always collapses eventually. But here's where the story becomes deeper than disaster. Because in the middle of the spiritual decay, there were still two names echoing quietly. Enoch and Noah. Enoch walked with God. Noah found grace. Notice the pattern. Before correction comes, there is always invitation. Before consequences arrive, there is always mercy extended. The problem wasn't that people didn't know. The problem was that they didn't care. And when hearts stop caring, corruption multiplies. It didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, gradually, compromise by compromise, laugh by laugh, decision by decision. That's how decline works. No one wakes up planning collapse. They drift there, and drifting feels harmless until it's not. There's also a mysterious verse in Genesis about sons of God and daughters of men. Many interpretations exist, but one truth remains consistent. Boundaries were crossed, lines blurred, restraints removed. When moral boundaries dissolve, chaos accelerates. The earth became filled with violence. Filled, meaning it saturated everything. Homes, markets, conversations, leadership. There was no safe corner left untouched. And this is where many people misunderstand divine justice. They imagine it as sudden wrath, but in reality, it was delayed restraint. For centuries, Methuselah's life symbolized patience, almost 1,000 years of warning. Think about that. 900 years of space, 900 years of opportunity to change direction. But freedom without humility becomes arrogance, and arrogance blinds. By the time Noah begins building the ark, most people were numb. Imagine seeing a massive structure being built on dry land, year after year, decade after decade, and still choosing to laugh. That is not ignorance. That is denial. Noah didn't preach fear. He built preparation. Every hammer strike was a silent sermon. Every plank placed was an invitation. Come inside, a line before it's too late. But here's the emotional weight of it all. Only 8 people entered, out of an entire civilization. 8. That number isn't just historical. It's haunting, because it shows how comfortable humanity can become in decline. We adapt to darkness faster than we admit. We adjust our standards to match culture. We silence conviction to avoid discomfort. And eventually, we call corruption normal. The flood wasn't just water covering land. It was consequence covering denial. It was reality meeting refusal. It was the end of a chapter humanity refused to close itself. But don't miss the deeper layer. God did not abandon humanity. He preserved a remnant. The ark wasn't just survival. It was continuity. It was a promise that restoration is possible. Judgment removed corruption. Mercy preserved future hope. Both existed simultaneously. And that tension is important, because divine justice is not cruelty. It's correction. When a surgeon removes infection, it hurts, but it heals. When rot spreads too far, cutting becomes necessary. The world before the flood had rotted from within. But here's the part that should unsettle us gently. Jesus later compared the days before his return to the days of Noah. People eating, drinking, marrying, living normally, until suddenly everything changed. Notice what's emphasized. Not violence, not chaos, normalcy, comfort, routine. That's what makes spiritual decline dangerous. It feels ordinary. It feels safe. It feels sustainable. Until it's not. Noah's generation didn't collapse because they lacked information. They collapsed because they ignored invitation. And invitation is fragile. Mercy is extended, but not forced. And Enoch's earlier removal becomes even more symbolic here. One man walked so closely, he stepped beyond death. Another man built so faithfully, he survived catastrophe. 2 responses to one corrupt world. Walk deeper, build obediently. Both require endurance. Both require resistance against cultural drift. Both require faith when others mock. So what does this mean for us? It means decline doesn't start with disaster. It starts with distance. Distance from truth. Distance from humility. Distance from accountability. And restoration doesn't start with fear. It starts with alignment. The flood wasn't random. It was a final moment after centuries of ignored mercy. And if that story still echoes today, it's not to scare, it's to awaken, because the same pattern still exists. Warning, patience, invitation, decision, outcome. The question isn't whether storms come. The question is whether we build before they arrive. Noah built in dry seasons, not when clouds appeared. He prepared while it was still calm. That is wisdom. And maybe the deepest lesson of that era isn't about water at all. It's about hearts. Hearts that drift. Hearts that resist. Hearts that align. One generation drifted until collapse. One family aligned and endured. History doesn't repeat itself mechanically, but patterns repeat spiritually. And the story whispers across centuries. Don't wait for rain to take warning seriously, because mercy is patient, but it is not permanent. And the ark is always built before the storm. What if the real danger before the flood wasn't the violence? What if it was the normalization of it? Because by the time we reach the stage of the story, something terrifying has happened. Corruption no longer shocks anyone. It blends in. It becomes culture. Genesis doesn't describe a single tyrant ruling the earth. It describes something worse. A collective shift. A generation that slowly agreed to move away from God together. No dramatic rebellion speech. No official announcement. Just gradual drift. And drift is always quiet first. It starts with small compromises. A lie that feels harmless. A desire that feels justified. An action that feels convenient. And when millions of people choose convenience over conscience, civilization tilts. The pre-flood world was brilliant. Don't imagine cavemen with clubs. Imagine architects, engineers, musicians, metalworkers, urban planners. They were building cities, forging tools, creating art, advancing knowledge. Innovation was thriving, but character was shrinking. That imbalance is deadly, because when intelligence grows faster than wisdom, power outruns restraint. And restraint is what protects society. Genesis says the earth was filled with violence. Filled. That means it saturated daily life. Transactions were corrupt. Power was abused. The strong crushed the weak. Justice was distorted. And over time, people stopped expecting better. That's when decline becomes irreversible. When injustice feels normal. When greed feels logical. When truth feels negotiable. And here's something subtle but powerful. No one thinks they are the villain in their own story. Every corrupt person believes they are justified. That's how moral decay spreads. Self-justification silences conviction. Conviction fades. Boundaries blur. Eventually, chaos becomes the operating system. And yet, in the middle of this moral collapse, Noah stands out. The Bible describes him as righteous in his generation. Not perfect. Not flawless, but different. That's important, because righteousness in a corrupt culture doesn't mean superiority. It means resistance. Resistance against drift. Resistance against normalization. Resistance against everyone else is doing it. And that kind of resistance is exhausting. Imagine being the only one building something that makes no sense to anyone else. Year after year, hammer after hammer, while neighbors laugh. Mockery is powerful. It pressures. It isolates. It tempts you to shrink. But Noah didn't shrink. Why? Because he wasn't building for applause. He was building from conviction. And conviction is stronger than comfort. Now, zoom out for a second. Think about the emotional climate of that era. People were still celebrating, still marrying, still planning futures, still investing in expansion. No sense of urgency, because when you live in a bubble of success, warnings feel dramatic. Enoch had warned. Noah was preparing, but the majority dismissed it. Why? Because visible prosperity can blind you to invisible decay. When cities grow, we assume progress. When wealth increases, we assume blessing. When technology advances, we assume improvement. But advancement without alignment can become acceleration toward collapse. The pre-flood civilization was accelerating, but in the wrong direction. And here's the chilling part. They likely believed they were at their peak, at their most advanced, at their strongest, right before everything ended. Collapse rarely announces itself loudly. It builds silently under the surface, like a structure weakening from within. From the outside, it looks impressive. Inside, it's hollow, and hollow structures fall suddenly. Now consider this emotional layer. God didn't send rain immediately. He waited while Noah built, possibly decades, maybe over a century. That means for over 100 years. Every sunrise was mercy. Every sunset was opportunity. Imagine walking past that massive ark daily, seeing it grow larger, hearing rumors about coming rain, and choosing to ignore it. That is not lack of evidence. That is hardened indifference. Indifference is more dangerous than rebellion. Rebellion at least acknowledges truth. Indifference shrugs at it. And indifference is what fills societies before collapse. Now here's something deeply reflective. The flood narrative is not about punishment for small mistakes. It's about a civilization that refused correction, refused warning, refused humility. The door of the ark didn't slam shut instantly. It remained open until the last moment. But once it closed. And that image is powerful because it represents a boundary. Grace has a window. Opportunity has a season. Delay does not mean forever. We don't like that thought. It feels uncomfortable. But boundaries protect meaning. If there were no consequences ever, choices would lose weight. Freedom would lose responsibility. And love would lose depth. The pre-flood world tested the limits of patience. And patience stretched almost a millennium. That's not impulsive judgment. That's restrained justice. But here's where this becomes personal. We often think corruption is out there, in governments, in systems, in other people. But corruption always begins in here, in private choices, in hidden thoughts, in small compromises. Civilizations don't decay overnight. They decay heart by heart, choice by choice. And restoration begins the same way. One decision, one alignment, one step back toward truth. Noah didn't reform society. He built obedience. He protected his family. He prepared for what others denied. Sometimes influence is not about changing the crowd. It's about preserving what matters. And here's the emotional tension of Part 4. The pre-flood corruption wasn't loud chaos every day. It was normalized dysfunction. Smiling faces covering spiritual emptiness. Prosperity masking moral erosion. Noise drowning out conscience. That's the real danger. Because when evil is shocking, people react. When evil is normalized, people adapt. And adaptation can be fatal. The world before the flood adapted to darkness, until darkness became identity. But one family refused to adapt. They endured ridicule. They endured isolation. They endured misunderstanding because they trusted something invisible over something visible. And when the first drop of rain fell, it was too late to begin building. Preparation always looks unnecessary until it's urgent, and urgency always feels sudden to the unprepared. The pre-flood world teaches one haunting truth. You can be advanced, successful, creative, growing, and still be spiritually collapsing. And collapse doesn't care about your achievements. It responds to alignment. So the question left hanging in the air is not, will there be storms? Storms always come. The question is, are we building while it's calm? Because history whispers this quietly. The strongest structures are built before the sky changes. Imagine a place so small on the map, yet so loud in history, that kings, empires, and prophets all spoke its name long before our time. Close your eyes for a second. Picture the waves of the Mediterranean touching a narrow strip of land. Children running through dusty streets. Ancient walls buried beneath modern buildings. Now imagine the same land being mentioned thousands of years ago in the pages of the Bible. Not as a random city, but as a sign. Today we're stepping into the final layer of this story. Not politics, not headlines, not arguments, but destiny. When the Bible mentions Gaza, it doesn't treat it like an ordinary city. It appears in moments of tension, transition, and turning points. From the time of the Philistines to the days of the prophets, Gaza stood at the edge of something bigger than itself. In the Old Testament, prophets like Amos spoke about Gaza in the context of justice, not hatred, not revenge, justice. The message was always the same. When violence dominates, consequences follow. When cruelty rises, correction comes. But here's where it gets deeper. Imagine a place so small on the map, yet so loud in history, that kings, empires, and prophets all spoke its name long before our time. Close your eyes for a second. Picture the waves of the Mediterranean touching a narrow strip of land. Children running through dusty streets. Ancient walls buried beneath modern buildings. Now imagine the same land being mentioned thousands of years ago in the pages of the Bible. Not as a random city, but as a sign. Today we're stepping into the final layer of this story. Not politics, not headlines, not arguments, but destiny. When the Bible mentions Gaza, it doesn't treat it like an ordinary city. It appears in moments of tension, transition, and turning points. From the time of the Philistines to the days of the prophets, Gaza stood at the edge of something bigger than itself. In the Old Testament, prophets like Amos spoke about Gaza in the context of justice, not hatred, not revenge, justice. The message was always the same. When violence dominates, consequences follow. When cruelty rises, correction comes. But here's where it gets deeper. Biblical prophecy is rarely just about destruction. It's about transformation. Take the words of Zephaniah. He described Gaza becoming quiet, emptied, shaken. For centuries, people read those words and thought they were only about ancient invasions. But prophecy in the Bible often works in layers. Immediate fulfillment and future echoes. That's what makes this so intense. Because when you study the pattern of Scripture, you notice something powerful. Before restoration, there is exposure. Before healing, there is shaking. Before peace, there is confrontation with truth. And Gaza has always stood at crossroads. In the time of Samson, Gaza was the place where strength collapsed. The temple fell. Pride was broken. It was dramatic, tragic, unforgettable. But that moment wasn't just about revenge. It symbolized the cost of corruption and the weight of choices. Fast forward centuries later, the region again appears in prophetic warnings. Not because it was uniquely evil, but because it represented a larger spiritual pattern. Human conflict, power struggles, pride, fear. And here's the part many people miss. The Bible never celebrates suffering. It grieves it. When prophets spoke of judgment, they wept. Their warnings weren't entertainment. They were heartbreak on paper. So what does this mean for us today? It means prophecy isn't about choosing sides. It's about understanding patterns. The rise and fall of nations. The cycle of violence. The consequences of injustice. The deep prophetic dimension isn't about predicting headlines. It's about recognizing that Scripture consistently shows this truth. When humanity refuses humility, history repeats itself. And Gaza, through centuries, has been a mirror of that cycle. But prophecy also carries hope. Many overlook that after warnings in the Old Testament, restoration is often promised. The same scriptures that speak of desolation also whisper about renewal, about land being rebuilt, about people finding peace again. Biblical prophecy is tension between justice and mercy, between consequence and compassion. That's why this topic hits so deep emotionally, because when you see images from the region today, it doesn't feel abstract. It feels human. Families, fear, faith, survival. And the Bible reminds us, every conflict in history ultimately points to humanity's need for peace that goes beyond borders. If there's one prophetic thread running through Scripture, it's this: violence never has the final word. Redemption does. Throughout history, cities destroyed have been rebuilt. Nations shattered have been restored. The Bible's largest story isn't about endless war. It's about a future where swords are laid down. So when people ask, is what's happening written in prophecy? The deeper question might be, are we learning the lesson prophecy was trying to teach all along, because prophecy isn't there to make us spectators. It's there to wake us up, to remind us that pride collapses, that injustice has consequences, but also that mercy is always possible. Gaza's biblical destiny, if you read carefully, is not just destruction. It's warning, followed by opportunity. Shaking, followed by rebuilding. Pain, followed by possibility. And maybe the most powerful part of this story isn't about one city at all. Maybe it's about humanity standing at a crossroads again, deciding whether we repeat the cycle or finally break it. History echoes. Prophecy whispers. The choice is always ours. After everything we've explored, the warnings of Amos, the shaking described by Zephaniah, the collapse in the days of Samson, there's one final dimension people rarely talk about: personal prophecy. The Bible doesn't record these cities just to give geography lessons. It uses them as mirrors. Gaza becomes more than a place. It becomes a symbol of what happens when cycles are ignored. Think about this carefully. Every time Scripture shows a nation rising in pride, ignoring justice, hardening at heart, the result is the same: collapse, shaking, exposure. But every time there is humility, something shifts. The prophetic pattern is not about revenge. It's about awakening. And this is where the emotional weight truly hits. Because when we watch conflict unfold anywhere in the world, we feel powerless. We scroll, we comment, we argue, and then we move on. But prophecy in the Bible was never written for spectators. It was written for reflection. What if the deeper message isn't this side versus that side? What if the deeper message is this? Humanity without compassion destroys itself. The prophets didn't just warn cities. They warn hearts. When injustice becomes normal, when suffering becomes statistics, when human lives become political tools, history repeats. And that's the chilling part. Because the Bible shows that cycles only break when people change. Not when borders change. Not when power shifts. But when hearts soften. This is why biblical prophecy always holds tension between judgment and hope. It confronts wrongdoing, but it also offers restoration. The shaking is never the final sentence. Restoration is always possible. If you study Scripture carefully, you'll notice something powerful. After warnings come invitations. Invitations to return, to rebuild, to choose a different path. And maybe that's the part we miss in modern conversations. We focus on outcomes. But prophecy focuses on transformation. The real prophetic question is not, will this city fall? It's, will humanity learn? Because the pattern doesn't only apply to nations. It applies to individuals. Pride before collapse. Humility before healing. That pattern hasn't changed in thousands of years. So when we talk about the biblical destiny of any place, maybe the deeper destiny is this: to remind us that power is temporary, that conflict is costly, that justice matters, and that mercy is stronger than destruction. There's a reason prophetic books in the Bible often end with hope, because the ultimate story of Scripture isn't devastation, it's redemption, and redemption always begins with awareness. Maybe the final lesson here is not about predicting tomorrow's headlines. Maybe it's about asking ourselves, are we contributing to cycles of anger, or are we becoming people who carry peace? Because the world doesn't change when arguments win. It changes when hearts do. And that might be the deepest prophetic dimension of all. Not a timeline, not a map, but a mirror. And what we choose to see in it will shape what comes next. After the warnings, after the patterns, after the shaking, there's always a silence in Scripture. And in that silence, something powerful begins. The prophets didn't just speak about collapse. They spoke about rebuilding. When Amos warned nations, he also spoke of restoration. When Zephaniah described desolation, he later described renewal. That's the rhythm of prophecy. Tear down, wake up, rise again. And here's the deeper layer most people never notice. In the Bible, cities are often restored not because they deserved it, but because mercy stepped in. That changes everything. because if destiny was only about punishment, history would have ended long ago. But Scripture constantly moves toward healing, toward rebuilding ruins, toward giving broken places another chance. So what does that mean in a world filled with headlines, fear, and division? It means a final chapter is never written in anger. The Bible's larger story always moves toward peace, toward a future where justice and compassion meet. And maybe that's the real prophetic tension. Not who wins, but who learns. Every generation stands at a crossroads. Every era believes its conflict is unique. Yet the pattern remains the same. Pride divides, humility restores. The destiny written across Scripture is not destruction without hope. It's warning with opportunity. And that opportunity is always this: choose a different path. If humanity keeps repeating cycles of hatred, the outcome never changes. But if even a few choose empathy over ego, mercy over revenge, something shifts. Prophecy was never meant to create fear. It was meant to create awareness. Awareness that power fades, that violence exhausts, that justice matters, that compassion rebuilds. The most powerful prophetic truth isn't about a timeline. It's about transformation, because the Bible doesn't end in ruin. It ends in renewal. And maybe that's the final emotional weight of this entire journey. No matter how intense the shaking, no matter how dark the moment feels, the story is not finished. History has seen cities rise from ashes, nations rebuild after collapse, communities heal after unimaginable pain. So when people ask about destiny, maybe the deeper answer is this: destiny is not fixed in stone. It's shaped by choices. And if the prophetic pattern teaches us anything, it's this: cycles can be broken, peace is possible, and the future is still unwritten. What happens next depends on what we choose to become. Before this ends, I want you to pause, not to argue, not to pick a side, not to predict tomorrow. Just pause, because after everything, the warnings, the patterns, the cycles, there's one final truth that sits quietly beneath it all. The Bible is not a book obsessed with destruction. It is a story obsessed with redemption. When Amos spoke of justice, it wasn't to celebrate downfall. It was to awaken conscience. When Zephaniah described shaking, it wasn't to glorify ruin. It was to clear the ground for rebuilding. And that's the part that changes everything. Prophecy in Scripture is never about, look what will burn. It's about, look what can be rebuilt. The real destiny written across the Bible isn't endless conflict. It's restoration after humility. And maybe that's the deepest emotional layer of this entire journey. Because when we look at any place that has known pain, what we're really seeing is humanity wrestling with itself. Fear against faith, pride against peace, power against compassion. But here's the powerful shift. Every time history reaches a breaking point, it also reaches a decision point. Collapse can lead to more destruction, or it can lead to change. The prophets cried because they knew something we often forget. Suffering is not meant to entertain us. It's meant to wake us up. Wake us up to the cost of hatred. Wake us up to the weight of injustice. Wake us up to the urgency of mercy. The Bible's final vision is not ruins. It is renewal, not endless war, but a future where peace is stronger than pride. And that future has never been forced into existence. It has always required choice. That's why this story matters. Not because it proves a headline, not because it predicts a timeline, but because it asks a question every generation must answer. Will we repeat the cycle, or will we break it? Because prophecy does not trap humanity. It warns humanity. And warnings are invitations. Invitations to choose compassion over cruelty, to choose humility over ego, to choose rebuilding over revenge. If there's any biblical destiny written across history, it is this: destruction is never the final word. Mercy is, and the story is still being written by leaders, by communities, by ordinary people, by us. The future is not sealed. It is shaped, and what we choose next will echo longer than any prophecy ever could.